And you have to appreciate that Andalus was a bit liberal. To give a context, yeah? If you go to Tower Hamlets, that's like going to Makkah and Medina. If you go to Goodmays, that's Muslim Spain. Yeah? that sense of being a bit more relaxed about certain things, yeah? That's how it was. In which case, you had a time period in Muslim Spain where you would have scholars writing about fiqh and debating issues of aqidah whilst drinking wine. Yeah? It was very a relaxed environment. There's a statement regarding Ibn Hazm which is, I don't know what is sharper, Ibn Hazm's tongue or the sword of Hajjaj. 3 years, he mastered the Maliki madhab. After this, he then mastered the Shafi'i madhab. And then through learning this, he then decided that he doesn't like what's known as qiyas, yeah, which is like analogical reasoning. When you want to refer to someone, or classically when you were referred to someone as being very bloodthirsty, you would refer to them or make a comparison between them and Hajjaj's sword. Yeah? And there's a statement regarding Ibn Hazm which is, I don't know what is sharper, Ibn Hazm's tongue or the sword of Hajjaj. Because Ibn Hazm, by the way, I've been asked to provide you with references. So assume that everything that I say today is a summary or an inference from the siyar of Imam al-Dhahab. So this essentially, our talk today is a summary or my translating of the section on Ibn Hazm in this book, inshallah. And there are a few things, like I said, that perhaps are taken from some academic articles as well. So this is some of the why Ibn Hazm is considered controversial in this sense. Why? Because he had a sharp tongue, he was very polemical, and he adopted a legal school known as the Zahiri school. Now, today the Zahiri school is effectively extinct. Effectively, I say, because there are some people today who claim that they follow the Zahiri school. Yeah, there are some people in Saudi Arabia, there are some people in Yemen who claim that they are Zahiri, or some people label them as being Zahiri. However, there is not a clean intellectual genealogy like we have with being a Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i or a Hanbali, in which there is a clean chain of transmission of the knowledge. The Zahiri school does not exist like that anymore. However, Ibn Hazm adopted this school and he championed this school and is one of the greatest scholars from this school. So before we continue on with Ibn Hazm, it makes sense that we discuss how did he grow up, where did he come about, and what was the situation before his birth and during his time period. So as I mentioned, Ibn Hazm is from Spain. This is where he grew up. Although his lineage goes back to Persia. So I believe his great-grandfather converted to Islam and was the Mawla, the kind of servant of, he was a servant and someone who was kind of under the protection of Yazid ibn Sufyan, who is the brother of Muawiyah. Yeah? So his lineage comes from this relationship with the Umayyads. Now, eventually, his grandfather or his great-grandfather, I forget which one, they traveled to Spain and they moved to Spain. Now, why did this move to Spain happen? So, during the decline of the Umayyads, you had obviously the rise of the Abbasids. The Abbasids took over the rule of the Muslims. Now, sorry, we skipped ahead a bit too much. There's something else that's very important to mention of how did we even have a Muslim Spain? Very quickly. Has anyone heard of Gibraltar? Yes, everyone's heard of Gibraltar. Do you know what the real name of Gibraltar is? Yes, Jabal Tariq. And who is it named after? Yes, Tariq bin Ziyad, who was sent to conquer this area. And this is I believe from a statement of Uthman radiallahu anhu, who said that Constantinople, Turkey would be conquered through Andalus. This is how under the Umayyads, this is where the Andalus was conquered and came. Now, we mentioned the Abbasids took over. Now, what the Abbasids did is they were interesting individuals. The Umayyads had fallen out of popularity, especially with all of the killing that took place with the Sahaba and many pious individuals, unfortunately, that lost their lives during the period of the Umayyads. The Abbasids, and if you remember from when we discussed Imam Jafar Sadiq, they were interesting individuals themselves. So what the Abbasids did is they grouped together all of the princes, all of those that had a rightful claim to becoming the next Khalifa, in terms of they had a descendancy to the current royal family to take over the Umayyad dynasty. They brought them all together, they invited them for a dinner, and they essentially attempted to assassinate all of them, except for one person who managed to get away. His name is Abdurrahman I. Yeah, Abdurrahman I, with his wife and his family, and I believe there was one other person, I believe, who was from Turkish descent, who helped them travel from the Arab lands into Andalus, into Muslim Spain. So this is where they broke off. So there is a period in Spain in which there's essentially a branch of the Umayyads, yeah, who are the ruling state. Then the Abbasids took over, and then they become a separate entity, a second ruling Islamic dynasty, but within Spain. This lasted for a period of time, and it was towards the end of this period in which Ibn Hazm was born. And then during his lifetime, by the time he's in his late 20s or in his early 30s, this is when this caliphate falls. Now what happens is Muslim Spain enters a time period where there's a lot of infighting between the different areas. So you have like an emirate system where you have multiple towns and cities claiming that they're the leadership. And you had people from this that were not from the Umayyad dynasty. Now, Ibn Hazm remained throughout his entire life loyal to the Umayyads. And he attempted throughout this time period, by advocating one of the last descendants of the Umayyads to take rulership again and to establish it and to re-establish the Umayyad rule. Ultimately, it was this splintering of the Umayyad dynasty into these smaller emirates that was arguably one of the most fundamental causes for the reconquering from the Christians of Muslim Spain. Why? Because disunity, greed, entitlement is what took over the hearts of the Muslims and led to their fall. And what happened when Muslim Spain fell? What happened to this region? Multiple Muslims were forced to convert to Christianity. Those that refused were killed. What happened to the Jews that were there? They were forced to convert to Christianity. And even the Christians that lived under the Muslims faced persecution because they were considered traitors by the Christians. Whereas under the Muslims, you had famous individuals famous rabbis. I believe his name is, what's his name? I'm going to mispronounce it. Maimonides, yeah? The Jewish people call him Rambam, yeah? Which I believe means the greatest rabbi, and some of them call him the smaller, as in his name is Musa, because he had an Arab name, but they considered him to be the lesser Moses, because of how significant he was for Judaism in terms of his theological writings and things like that. Now, he was from Al-Andalus. And not only that, he served as a physician and he was involved in the Muslim politics. This is how you can say, even though it was a caliphate, it was a truly secular society in terms of religion didn't enter the politics insofar as anyone could enter the politics. But of course it was a theocracy because they followed the position of the caliphate model. But when I say secular, I mean secular society insofar as being multi-theological and multicultural, without discrimination. People were allowed to get involved in all spheres of life without any discrimination. So Ibn Hazm was deeply saddened by this fall, deeply saddened by all of this. So this is the context. Now, we mentioned that he was born towards the end. Now, he was born by his own testimony and recorded by Imam al-Dhahabi in the last day of Ramadan. So he was born in Ramadan. And he lived a unique lifestyle. So his father served in the court of the Umayyad kings as a vizier. So he had a significant position and significant political clout in this sense. So Ibn Hazm grew up in luxury, with wealth, with ease. He lived the life of a of a true politician, the kid of a child of a politician. As such, he didn't necessarily have a strong education with Islam, even though of course he was fluent in Arabic and things like that. But in terms of like fiqh and things like this wasn't his thing in childhood. Rather, he was educated in literacy, poetry, philosophy, and he was raised because of his father's position. How old are you, young man? No, you sir. You're this 17. That's old enough, mashallah. So he was because of his political lifestyle. Some of the kings had what's known as a haram, where they kept like their lady friends, that was in a halal manner. So Ibn Hazm was actually raised by these ladies, and his first Quran teachers were these ladies. So they were pious women as well, mashallah. And I'm not saying that as a joke. They had piety and things like that. These were women that were like the wives of some of these men. So he got to understand women very well, and he became a ladies' man in this sense, but not in a haram way. Although he recounts that he made some mistakes in his life. Nothing major, but he recounts these things that wouldn't be nice to our sentiment, but things like this. And you have to appreciate that Andalus was a bit liberal compared to, if you go to give a context, if you go to Tower Hamlets, that's like going to Makkah and Medina. If you go to Goodmays, that's Muslim Spain, that sense of being a bit more relaxed about certain things, that's how it was. In which case you had a time period in Muslim Spain where you would have scholars writing about fiqh and debating issues of aqeedah whilst drinking wine. It was very a relaxed environment in that sense. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from that. Ameen. So Ibn Hazm grew up in this environment, and he got married very young, mashallah. And then his wife died as well. And he became so heartbroken that he wrote a philosophical treatise known as, it's translated in different ways. One way is translated as Ring of the Dove, another one is translated as Crown of the Dove. And this book is all about love. Incredibly Neoplatonic, but it's all about love. And he investigates love from multiple angles, and he goes into all of these things. He talks about love between a man and a woman, love between friends, love like companionship, all of the things, betrayal, what to do when your companion has backbited you, betrayed you. How do you what do those feelings mean? And he essentially, if we're going to remove all the Neoplatonism and the philosophy, what he basically says is, love is when your soul sees in another soul something similar between the two things. And what he basically argues for is a early notion of the concept of soulmates. Obviously this links to, he has some Neoplatonic arguments and philosophy, but leave that aside, we don't need to explain that. We can talk about, he talks about when the souls are in the planes, where before the souls enter their bodies in this thing, and the souls meet each other, and there's a connection between them. So he talks about these things, but he says that ultimately, when people love each other, it's due to the souls having commonalities and similarities. So anyway, there's a famous no, this hadith, yes. So but he adds a level of Neoplatonism to this, which I've said it a few times, so I might as well just quickly say what it means. What I'm talking about is that the idea that all the souls essentially are coming from one essence that has broken apart, and that what the parts that were similar in some sense, these are the parts that you're attracted to. Obviously, we don't believe in this nonsense. A'udhu billah, it's nonsense. Neoplatonism is rubbish. The only people that claim Islam, that maintain Neoplatonism, are the Ismailis. In fact, the entirety of their religion is based on Neoplatonism. Anyway, they are not the topic of our talk today. So, in a narration which is so there is multiple forms of this narration that I'm about to say. some is claimed to be from Ibn Hazm himself. And Imam al-Dhahabi, he narrates it from the father of Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi. This is not Ibn Arabi the Sufi, this is the Qadi, who is very famous also from Spain. And he is, if we were to say, the number one hater of Ibn Hazm. I haven't read anyone who hates Ibn Hazm more than this man. And Imam al-Dhahabi says that Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi was too harsh. And he even gives a relationship to himself and Ibn Hazm by saying he was too harsh to the teacher of my father. Yeah, this is what Imam al-Dhahabi says in his Siyar. Yeah, so he gives this. He links himself to Ibn Hazm, and Imam al-Dhahabi does justice and praises Ibn Hazm. Anyway, in this story, which is narrated by the father of Qadi Abu Bakr, he says that when Ibn Hazm was 26 years old, a friend of his father's, Ibn Hazm's father, passes away. So he goes to the masjid to pray the janazah prayer. When he enters the masjid, he immediately sits down. So the people critique him and they say, are you not going to pray Tahiyatul Masjid? You've entered the masjid and you've just sat down. So then he's taught what Tahiyatul Masjid is, and they narrate the ahadith around Tahiyatul Masjid. And then he prays the janazah prayer. Now in the version that is attributed to Ibn Hazm, according to Ibn Hazm, he didn't know how to pray the janazah prayer. He just copied the people around him. He just followed what they did, and he felt intense embarrassment. Later he came back to the masjid after the time of Asr, after praying the Asr Salah. Yeah, so he comes back to the masjid and he does Tahiyatul Masjid again. And then the people stop him and say, don't you know that this is a time that is not for prayer? So after this, Ibn Hazm becomes incredibly embarrassed, and he asks to be pointed to who is the most notable scholar. In 3 years, he masters the Maliki madhab, which is the predominant madhab of Spain. Before this period, yeah, Spain predominantly followed the fiqh of Imam al-Awza'i. Yeah. However, later this got changed and replaced by the Maliki madhab. And the Maliki madhab became the predominant madhab of Muslim Spain. And this is the madhab that Sheikh Ibn Hazm mastered in 3 years. 3 years, he mastered the Maliki madhab. After this, he then mastered the Shafi'i madhab. And then through learning this, he then decided that he doesn't like what's known as qiyas, yeah, which is like analogical reasoning, where you go from two, you take one ruling and you identify that this is the cause that causes that application of the ruling, and then you find another instance with that same cause, so you apply the ruling to that cause. This is what qiyas is, yeah, in a nutshell. So you say that, to give an example, we say that the prohibition of khamr, yeah, in the Quran is intoxication. Yes, so we say what is known, the cause, the illah, the cause of prohibition is intoxication. So we extrapolate from this and infer to all instances of intoxication are prohibited. Yes, so this Ibn Hazm disliked this a lot. And what he decided to do was adopt the Zahiri school. The Zahiri school is essentially is in some ways was originally an offshoot of the Hanbali madhab. Its kind of intellectual genealogy is from the Hanbali madhab. Why? Because Imam Ahmed also disliked qiyas, but he didn't negate it. So the principle that Imam Ahmed had was, if there is a mas'ala, an issue which needs to be addressed, an inquiry, I believe is a better translation, yeah, that needs to be addressed, and we have some weak hadith that answers the issue, we will take the weak hadith and not do qiyas. However, if we don't find something from the ahadith, then we will do qiyas. This was the position of Imam Ahmed. Dawood al-Zahiri, the founder of the Zahiri madhab, took it a step further and moved away from this point. Interestingly, the Zahiris traditionally had a very similar aqidah to the Athari school in many ways. However, sometimes their lack of qiyas in certain issues didn't allow for what we can call tafsil, or textual contextualization. Yeah? So we can say maybe there's something mentioned in the Quran about, where فوق أيديهم, yeah, that Allah's hand is over their hands, yeah. Now, I'm not saying the Zahiris have this. This is just an example that came to my mind. No one says that Allah's hand is literally over their hand. No one says this from all of the Sunni theological schools. But again, this is a bit of a straw man, because I'm not saying the Zahiris say this, but just by way of an example, their kind of approach would potentially lead someone to affirm this, to say, no, we can't do this. I'm not saying the Zahiris do this. I don't know what they say on this issue. I'm just using this as an example to see how, to demonstrate the difference between the Atharis and the Zahiris. Anyway, Ibn Hazm adopted all of this, and however, he broke away from this in some ways because of his philosophical background. He actually became, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah refers to him as a mutakallim, yeah, and says that he's a mutakallim who lacks the maturity of al-Ash'ari, and he critiques Ibn Hazm for this and says that he's gone astray in this issue. Anyway, after this, Ibn Hazm starts gaining traction, and as we said, after the fall of the independent caliphate in Muslim Spain, with the rise of the different emirates, he becomes more polemical in his writings. Because why does he become more polemical? Because he blames the sinfulness and what he terms as innovations within the people for the fall. And in some ways he's right. That's a lot of the lack of unity, the greed, and all of these issues was the fall. What caused this decline and this lack of unity? So he became very harsh in his writings and very critical. However, this doesn't take away from his writings and his scholarship. So during this period of harshness and how he's described, Imam al-Dhahabi says that he was very harsh with his words. That he was someone who's described in terms of his knowledge, he's described as an ocean. He's described as being absolutely unique. And Imam al-Dhahabi says regarding Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, who's very significant, he's a major scholar and a Qadi. Imam al-Dhahabi says about him, he never reached the level of Ibn Hazm. He never reached the level of Ibn Hazm. Ibn Hazm was a man of hadith and very strong in his hadith. In fact, I forgot the name. You'll have to check. But in fact, I will get the scholar's name later. I have it in my notes, but I've forgotten. But this give me 1 second. I will find this quote for you, because it's an important quote that I don't want to lose, inshallah. But whilst I look for it, I will mention as well, Izzuddin. Yes. So he says, in all of the books of Islam on the subject of al-ilm, I have seen nothing like Ibn Hazm's al-Muhalla, nor Ibn Qudama's al-Mughni. So he says these two books in all of the books of al-Islam are the most unique. These two books are the most significant. Imam al-Dhahabi says, despite all of these things, because of his harsh tongue and his critical nature and his persistent debates, Ibn Hazm is known for debating everyone. And it's narrated about him, unfortunately, I narrate this, I see it as a point of praise, but Qadi Abu Bakr thought he would mention it to critique him, but we'll mention it as praise, that even after being a Dhahiri, he then, according to Qadi Abu Bakr, in a debate, he entered into a debate with some Malikis. And the Malikis scholars said to Ibn Hazm, you lack the knowledge in this issue, you don't understand. So Ibn Hazm went away for a few days and he came back and debated them again on the same issue. And they narrated that now when we debated him on the issue, it's as if we knew nothing on the issue, as if he was an expert in the issue. And he said, according to Qadi Abu Bakr, he says that Ibn Hazm said, the reason, or this to the effect, the reason why there is a difference before and the difference now is because you're doing taqleed, whereas I'm a mujtahid. And I needed to ijtihad and had to have time essentially to deliberate on the issue, because he could not just take the opinions from his head, as in the opinions of other people, and follow them as someone who does taqleed. So according to this narration, Sheikh Ibn Hazm effectively left the Dhahiri school at one point and became a mujtahid, an absolute mujtahid mutlaq, like Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, Ahmed. However, it seems to be the case that for the majority of Ibn Hazm's life, he advocated for the Zahiri school. Now, what this led to, these debates, was a lot of hostility. Likewise, because of his lifetime advocating for the legitimacy of the Umayyads over these pop-up states and these people that essentially divided the Ummah, he continuously spoke out against them and took these political stances. This led to political entities hating him. This led to the Maliki scholars predominantly hating him and having huge debates with him. That what happened is a famous incident in which all of the books of Ibn Hazm was burned. This is so significant that even till today, in Spain, there is a stamp depicting the burning of Ibn Hazm's books. So this is an incident that happened. Likewise, Imam al-Dhahabi says that Ibn Hazm was given the reward for his harshness, for his tongue. That he was given his just deserts in this sense because of what happened to his books and the refutations and the people turning away from him and rejecting him. Ultimately, he was exiled from Qurtuba. That he was exiled from these lands where he was primarily based, and he settled, I forget the name of the town, in a town where his grandfather came. When his grandfather came to Spain, he settled here. Now, and even in this area, he had problems. And then what happened was, essentially what Imam al-Dhahabi states, is that the scholars of his time period, the contemporary scholars, they rejected him. They shunned his books and they ignored his name. Then the latter scholars, essentially what happened was that they would dissect his books and criticize them. But amongst the beads, they still found pearls. Meaning that Ibn Hazm's works were unique and he had deep insights and deep thoughts and was deeply critical. I've seen that from my teacher, Sheikh Akram, he mentions that in his days of attending the madrasa, one of the books that he was warned against was Al-Muhalla. And then he said, Sheikh Akram states that after reading Al-Muhalla, it said obviously he didn't adopt the positions of Ibn Hazm, but he said after reading this book, it gave him such deep insights into fiqh and deepened his understanding of usul al-fiqh and processing issues. However, there is one thing, Sheikh Akram translated this, may upset your masjid stance. Actually, no, it does not upset your masjid stance. It supports the stance of this masjid, mashallah, tabarakallah, which is he translated Ibn Hazm's work, which encouraged women attending the masjid. Yeah, because you have a nice facilities, mashallah, for the sisters. But this upsets the... So anyway, Sheikh Akram translated this work by Ibn Hazm, which is essentially a work which narrates various ahadith and makes various arguments for women attending the masjid. And in this book, Ibn Hazm, he counters the claim which some scholars mention, where you know the hadith in which essentially the Umar radiallahu anh and his wife are having a dispute about going to the masjid. And the wife of Umar radiallahu anh, she narrates to Umar that, the Prophet Muhammad said that you can't prohibit someone from attending the masjid. So he says, okay, go. Yeah, and he said, but the times are not like the times used to be. Yeah, sorry, this comes later in the narration. Yeah, so anyway, she goes to the masjid and she said that there was a man who threw a stone at her. And when she comes back to the house, Umar said, times aren't like they used to be. Ibn Hazm, he researches this hadith and looks into the narrations and he finds another narration where Umar provides clarification. What actually happened was, it was Umar who threw the stone at his wife, and he threw the stone at his wife so that she could come back and complain, and then he can say times aren't like they used to be. So he mentions that, there's this one narration which is from the perspective of how An's wife is perceiving it. Then there is the full story from the perspective of Umar, meaning he knew he couldn't prohibit his wife from attending the masjid, but he wanted a way to discourage her, because he had some ghayrah, he had something, he didn't want his wife to be seen and things like that. And that he's Amirul Mu'mineen. People are gonna look upon his wife more than the average man because of her status related to him. And we know that this is a valid position to take. Hence why the wives of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they if you take that, there is no dispute in the matter that the niqab was wajib upon the wives of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, and they were ordered that they speak to, if they were to speak to guests or speak to men, that they speak from behind a veil. And they took this literally in the sense of when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had guests at his house, his wives would be behind a curtain. Yes, they shared food from the same plate and table and things like this, but they were behind a curtain. So this was what was prescribed for the wives of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Why? Because of his status as a community leader, as a statesman, engaging with the people in this sense, and obviously as a Nabi. Likewise, for the Khalifa, for Amirul Mu'mineen, similar standards must be in place. So this is one of the kind of unique insights that Ibn Hazm had, where he basically, what seemed to be a knockdown argument for why sisters should not attend the masjid, Ibn Hazm was like, I'm not gonna accept your evidence and critique it. So this is some of the insights of Ibn Hazm. So this essentially reaches our end with Ibn Hazm, that his life was one of unique scholarship. Why? Because he was someone who grew up. Yeah. Now we have to analyze what are the benefits from this story. Now, what are the benefits? He was someone who grew up not receiving much of an Islamic education. Yes, he had the benefit of Arabic. He received what we'd describe as a very good secular education. But after one embarrassing incident, he became one of the greatest scholars of Islam, the greatest scholar from Muslim Spain, someone who is stated to have written one of the greatest books of fiqh in the entirety of Islam. Why? Because after he realized, one of my shaykh, he said that when you're a lay person, please no one get offended, yeah? This is from one of my Egyptian shaykh, and Egyptians have the tendency to be quite harsh, yeah? So they said, when you're a layman, a person who has not studied the Islamic sciences, there isn't a state that's more disgracing. Why? Not because you're disgraced in the sight of Allah or something like this, not like that. Not because a scholar has some special thing over you, not like this. Not that because you're less of a person. Why? Because what is more kind of shaming in yourself than having to rely on someone else? Because if we were to cast some shubuhat into the hearts of the people, let's say you go and perform wudu and you cut your toenails. Do you need to do wudu again? Does this break your wudu? Which of the madhahib say no, it doesn't, and you should wash the feet again just out of, because now you've unearthed an uncleaned area that wasn't touched by the original wudu? Which of the madhahib say no, it's fine, just carry on? Like these issues, yeah? You now need to ask this question. Or let's say you've gone for hajj and you've completed your hajj, but you haven't done the farewell hajj. The farewell tawaf. What do? You realize you didn't do a farewell tawaf. You got on the aeroplane. Is your hajj incomplete? Do you need to pay some remuneration? These things. If you don't have the answer in your mind, then this means you need to ask someone, you need to rely on someone. This is a form of shaming of yourself, right? Because you need to rely on someone. Then, when you begin the journey of knowledge, you're shamed even more. You're shamed even more. Why? Because now you give up even more independence. Because now you need to go and study with the teacher, and sometimes you have to tolerate the nature of your teacher, who can be harsh sometimes. One of my teachers said to me, you studied philosophy in a Western institute, and you studied with a particular Islamic group, I won't name them, in the past, and now you have ugly ideas. Yeah, so yes, studying with teachers can be shaming. He said this in front of the whole class. He said that my mind has been warped and has become something ugly and needs rectifying. Yeah, so studying with teachers can be difficult as well. And then when you become a scholar, now you have some dignity. Why? Because you can stand on your own 2 feet. You can approach the book of Allah, the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, with a degree of independence. And you don't have to rely on anyone to approach these texts and to approach these rulings. You can do some research by yourself. Obviously, I'm not saying you're a mujtahid, but you have some independence again. You have your autonomy back. And then this becomes dignifying. Ibn Hazm saw from one incident, he didn't want that disgrace over himself. He didn't want to feel the shame of being embarrassed like that. like he was before. Now, has anyone here have the ambition of becoming a scholar or learning the Arabic language or memorizing the Quran? Don't put your hands up, because what I'm going to say next might shame you. But if you have this in your head, remember, it took Ibn Hazm one embarrassing incident and 3 years to master an entire madhab. I think it's a reality check for myself and for all of us. When we have goals, we need to have some himmah, we need to have this drive and this perseverance and this conviction to go through with them. Because he did it in 3 years. Became a restricted expert in a madhab. Yes, okay, he knew Arabic already. But was it just that drove him? No. It was the drive to excel, to achieve. This is what we need. This is the first benefit we can see from the story of Ibn Hazm. And think about it. There's many benefits that Ibn Hazm has brought. You don't have to follow his opinions, but sometimes hearing a view that's different, just so you can learn more about yourself and understanding a different approach to thinking and critical thinking is highly beneficial. Think about what we wouldn't have had if it was not for that incident. The second thing we see from the life of Ibn Hazm is, in fact, the turmoil of disunity. We see in Ibn Hazm someone who went from writing a book, it's not that famous, but it's loved by the West, a book on love and relationships. In this book, by the way, Ibn Hazm talks about his own relationships unrestrictedly. Like he talks about women that he's spoken to. He talks about friends that he's betrayed, that have betrayed him, and things like this. It's almost like what's it called? Like a semi-autobiography, something like that. And there's a particular name for it, but something like that, where he goes through all of these experiences and shares it. Someone who's quite soft-hearted, if they're going to do this, yeah. Someone who's very emotional. He goes from that to constant debates and refutations. Why? Because his heart couldn't handle the disunity amongst the Muslims. And his continuous support for the Umayyads. Why? Because the Umayyads were special? No. Yes, he had some familial ties to them, given that he had that being a Mawla originally. But why? No, because they were the legitimate rulers of that area, and other rulers propped up. Why? Because of greed and seeking fame. He continuously strove, why? To reunite the Muslims. And that drive of unity and correcting wrongs came out in his theological and fiqh-based writings, because why? He saw we have this corruption. Why? Because there's various ills. So he sought to correct those, what he perceived to be innovations, what he perceived to be theological issues through his writings. So whilst he upset people and sometimes he made mistakes, he did it, why? To reunite the Muslims upon haqq. So we need to have that same drive to rectify ourselves, to rectify our brothers, and to rectify our society. Why? Because look at what happened to Muslim Spain. They were destroyed, annihilated. All of that history. Do you know Oxford University? By the way, this is unverified information. I saw it on a TikTok video. Yeah. Apparently, the gown, the famous gown that all graduates wear, and the hat that originates from Oxford University, was taken from the Andalusian tradition of holding a Quran upon your head upon the graduation of the Hufad, and that the gowns are similar to the gowns that the Andalusians wore. Yeah, as in, you know, you wear a thobe and a cloak over the top. Yeah, this is what the graduation gown resembles. That this was taken from there. Whether or not this is true is a side point. However, the establishment of Oxford University, because Oxford University was originally essentially a educational monastery for Christians. Yeah, this was from the experience of Muslim Spain. When they saw the madrasa system in Spain, they tried to build their own madrasa. This is what we had, and this is what they followed. And everything in Muslim Spain was totally destroyed, ruined. Why? Because the Muslims prioritized their own nafs over unity. So we must have that drive to establish unity. And having unity doesn't just mean accepting nonsense. Clearly we see from Ibn Hazm it didn't mean that. Sometimes it means arguing and fighting, even if it means that you get outcast. Please brothers, don't go that far, yeah? Keep But it means standing up for what you believe is right, essentially. Jazakumullah khair for your attendance and for tolerating me for a third time. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.